You ever notice how some of the strongest people you meet are the quiet ones? The ones who slip away from the noise, not because they're afraid of life, but because they feel it more deeply than most. Tonight, I want to talk about emotionally intelligent women, women who listen closely, who observe quietly, who break and rebuild themselves with a kind of courage most people never witness. And I want to explore why so many of them, despite being compassionate, wise, and resilient, choose isolation, not as an escape, but as a path. Let's walk through this together. They say some people can read between the lines, but emotionally intelligent women, they read the entire library hidden behind them. They don't just listen to what you say, they listen to the pauses, the breaths you hold, the tremble in your tone. They see the way your eyes shift when something hurts. They catch the slight tension in your shoulders when you're not ready to speak your truth. They sense the unspoken storms, the ones even you might not realize are forming. And that kind of perception, that depth of awareness, it's a gift, but it's also a weight, a constant stream of information, emotion, and energy that doesn't come with an off switch. Imagine walking into a room and instantly knowing who's pretending to smile, who's grieving quietly, who's hiding anger beneath charm, who's craving connection but too afraid to ask for it. Most people move through the world with a kind of emotional filter. They see what's obvious, but these women, they feel everything. It's like trying to listen to one song while the entire world plays in the background. All the notes, all the rhythms, all the dissonance. They can't help but hear it. And because of that, they carry more than their own feelings. They absorb the atmosphere, the tension, the heartbreak, the hope. They can walk away from a conversation that seemed ordinary to everyone else but feel drained because they were quietly tending to someone else's emotional wounds the whole time. I remember talking to a woman like this once. After a long day spent surrounded by people, she told me, "I feel like everyone handed me tiny pieces of their pain. It didn't look like much, but it all adds up." And she said it gently without blame because people like her rarely blame. They understand that most folks don't realize what they're doing. They're just drawn to someone who listens, someone who doesn't judge, someone who feels safe. That's part of the exhaustion too, being the safe harbor. When you're the person who understands, who truly hears, others naturally drift toward you. They open up, they vent, they unravel, they feel better afterward. But the emotionally intelligent woman, she walks away carrying the echo of everything she just soothed. She doesn't resent it, that's not her nature. But she pays for it in silence later, usually alone, trying to process everything she picked up along the way. That's why she chooses isolation, not out of fear or cynicism, but out of necessity. Solitude is the only space where her mind can finally stop observing and her heart can finally breathe. Some people misunderstand that. They think she's withdrawing out of coldness or that she doesn't like being around others. But in truth, she loves deeply. She feels deeply. That's exactly why she steps back. When you experience people on such an intimate emotional wavelength, moments of quiet become essential because the truth is emotional intelligence doesn't turn off when you're tired. It keeps noticing, it keeps decoding, it keeps caring, and caring, truly caring, takes energy. There's research suggesting that people with heightened empathy exhibit increased brain activity in regions associated with emotional processing. Their minds literally work harder. That means when they engage with someone in pain and conflict or even just in emotional confusion, they are neurologically more active. It's not dramatic, it's biological, and it wears them down faster than it wears down the average person. Now imagine a life where nearly every interaction touches you that deeply. It's no wonder isolation becomes a refuge. Not isolation that stems from sadness or bitterness, but the kind that feels like stepping out into a quiet night after being in a crowded room. a moment to recalibrate, a moment to hear your own thoughts again. Women with emotional intelligence often say things like, I just need a little space to clear my head, or I feel better when I can sit with myself for a while. And those aren't excuses, they're truths. They've learned that if they don't take time to decompress, they start losing the inner calm that makes them who they are. In their solitude, they recalibrate, they reflect, they sort through what belongs to them and what they've picked up from others, because they know if they don't separate the two, they'll start carrying burdens that were never meant to be theirs. I met a woman once who said the moment she realized she needed solitude was when she found herself crying over someone else's heartbreak, someone she barely knew, not out of pity, but out of resonance. She felt their pain as if it were her own. That's when she understood the importance of stepping back, of creating boundaries, not to shut people out, but to preserve her own emotional energy. And if you think about it, there's a quiet kind of strength in that choice. It takes courage to say, I need time alone. It takes awareness to recognize when your soul is tired. It takes wisdom to retreat without running away. Emotionally intelligent women don't isolate because they can't handle the world. They isolate because they handle it too well. They isolate because they notice everything, the joy, the sorrow, the lies, the longing, and their hearts need space to recover from the weight of so much perception. And here's the thing, they're not asking for sympathy. They don't want to be treated like fragile creatures who can't be around others. They simply want to be understood. They want people to know that their silence isn't distance, it's healing. Their quiet isn't disinterest, it's restoration. Their retreat isn't rejection, it's resilience. So when they choose solitude, it's not a step away from life. It's a step toward balance, a step toward peace, a step toward being able to show up again with clarity, compassion, and the kind of emotional presence that makes them so rare. Because the truth is, emotionally intelligent women see beyond words, and living with that kind of vision will always demand moments of sacred quiet. If you'd like, I can expand the next keynote in the same style, or blend all five into a single long-form narrative. You ever meet someone who refuses to play the game everyone else seems so comfortable with? Someone who moves through the world with this quiet certainty, this almost stubborn commitment to being real in a time when almost everything feels staged? That's what emotionally intelligent women are like. They value authenticity in a way that makes you pause because it's not loud and it's not demanding, but it's powerful. It's the kind of power that doesn't need an audience to exist. For them, authenticity isn't some poetic ideal. It's oxygen. It's how they breathe, how they connect, how they protect their sanity in a world built on illusion. They know the difference between being seen and being noticed. One feeds the soul, the other feeds the ego. And if there's one thing they refuse to do, it's starve their soul for the sake of pleasing an audience that doesn't matter. The truth is, attention has never been hard to get. Anyone can raise their voice, post a filtered moment, or put on a personality that isn't theirs. We live in a time where validation is handed out like candy, sweet, quick, and ultimately empty. But authenticity, that's rare. That's earned. That's felt deep in the bones. Emotionally intelligent women understand this instinctively. They don't need the spotlight because it doesn't illuminate anything real. It just casts shadows. And they've spent too long learning who they are to start losing themselves again in someone else's projection. I once spoke to a woman who told me she deleted a social media post that had gone viral, not because she regretted what she said, but because the attention didn't feel like it belonged to her. She said people weren't reacting to my truth. They were reacting to something they wanted to believe about me. That kind of self-awareness is rare. She wasn't afraid of the attention. She just didn't want to be shaped by it. Emotionally intelligent women crave something deeper, genuine connection. They want someone who listens because they care, not because it's their turn to talk. They want friends who aren't competing for the spotlight, but holding space for truth. They want partners who aren't in love with their image, but with their actual unfiltered self, the version that might be messy, quiet, complicated, or still figuring things out. And that longing for authenticity often leads them into periods of solitude, not because they dislike people, but because dealing with inauthenticity is emotionally expensive. It takes energy to navigate half-truths, to sift through hidden agendas, to smile politely at conversations that skate across the surface of things. They pick up on insincerity the same way someone else might pick up on a bad smell. It's immediate and it sticks. There's a kind of loneliness that comes with seeing the world so clearly, not a loneliness that comes from lack of company, but from lack of depth. Emotionally intelligent women know what it feels like to sit in a room full of people and still feel alone because nothing being said touches the truth of anything. That's why they choose authenticity, even when it means fewer friendships, fewer relationships, fewer interactions. But here's the remarkable thing. They don't resent it. They don't wish to be like everyone else. They don't crave the noise. They simply understand that quiet truth is more valuable than loud performance. And once you experience the comfort of honesty, the chaos of pretense becomes impossible to tolerate. There's a study I remember reading that suggested people with high emotional intelligence form fewer connections but significantly deeper ones. It makes sense. They don't scatter their energy, they invest it. They're not building a crowd, they're building a circle made of people who don't flinch at vulnerability, who don't mistake honesty for intensity, who don't run when emotions get real. These women look for resonance, not recognition. They want conversations where both people walk away changed, even if only slightly. They want moments where laughter is unforced and silence is intense. They want relationships where "how are you" actually means "tell me what your heart is carrying today." I remember a story about a woman who left a long-term relationship not because there was betrayal or conflict, but because there was no authenticity left. She said, "We stopped talking about the things that mattered. We became characters instead of partners." It wasn't anger that made her leave. It was the quiet grief of realizing she could no longer be herself there. That's the kind of clarity emotionally intelligent women carry. They don't chase relationships for comfort, they choose them for truth. And they're not afraid to walk alone when that truth is missing. They'd rather sit in a cafe alone, sipping coffee in silence, than sit across from someone who doesn't see them. They'd rather spend a Friday night reading under a blanket than dress up for a room full of shallow conversations. They'd rather wait years for a meaningful connection than settle for a convenient one. Some people see that as being picky, but it's not pickiness, it's alignment. It's knowing their worth so deeply that they can't pretend anymore. It's understanding that attention burns fast, but authenticity ignites slow and steady, like a flame that doesn't go out. Emotionally intelligent women aren't impressed by charm, they're moved by sincerity. They're not dazzled by big promises, they're anchored by consistency. They don't care how many people like them, they care how many people understand them. And that distinction changes everything. They have felt what it's like to be applauded for the wrong reasons. They've experienced being admired by people who never truly knew them. They've learned that being wanted is easy, but being valued is rare. And once they've tasted that difference, they never go back. Their hearts are calibrated to truth. They feel when someone's words don't match their intentions. They notice when someone shows affection only when others are watching. They sense when someone is performing closeness instead of actually being close. And because they sense all of that, they protect themselves. They step back. They choose the quiet path. And sometimes the world mistakes their retreat as a sign of aloofness or disinterest, when in reality it is simply a refusal to engage in anything less than real. Their isolation is not a hiding place, it's a refining place, a place where they return to themselves, a place where they heal from the noise, a place where they remember what authenticity feels like so they can recognize it again when it finally appears. Authenticity over attention, depth over noise, truth over appearance, that is the way they live. And the world is better for it. There's a certain look people carry after they've been hurt, not the pain itself, but the wisdom that grows from it. Emotionally intelligent women wear that look quietly. It's not bitter, not hardened, not guarded in a way that pushes people away. It's something softer, something thoughtful, like they've walked through a fire and came out not as ashes, but as something forged. You can see it in the way they speak, the way they listen, the way they choose their company with deliberate care. They've been through things, heavy human things, and they learn from every part of it. Pain is a strange teacher. It doesn't give you a lesson plan. It doesn't warn you before the test. It just hits, sometimes all at once, sometimes little by little, until you're forced to confront truths you didn't want to see. Emotionally intelligent women don't shy away from those truths. They don't pretend the hurt didn't happen. They sit with it, they unpack it, they study the pieces of themselves that were affected. And because of that, they come out the other side with an understanding that most people never reach. They know what it feels like to give more than they received, to love without being seen, to show up for people who disappeared when it was their turn to stay. They've been misunderstood for being too emotional, too caring, too invested in things that others treated casually. They've felt the sting of someone saying, "You're overreacting," when all they were doing was reacting with honesty. They've trusted people who weren't ready for the depth of connection they offered. And they've been left holding the silence after those people walked away. But here's the remarkable part. They didn't let those experiences turn them into someone they're not. They didn't let the world convince them to love any less deeply or feel any less fully. They just learned how to recognize the difference between people who value their heart and people who only value what their heart gives them. I once knew a woman who had spent years in a relationship where she constantly felt invisible, not because her partner didn't care in some superficial sense, but because he didn't understand her emotional depth. She said, "I finally realized I was loving both of us." And when she left, she didn't walk away with anger. She walked away with clarity, the kind that only comes after you've tried everything and finally choose yourself. Her voice wasn't shaky when she said it. It was steady, like someone who had rebuilt her spirit one quiet evening at a time. Emotionally intelligent women learn from hurt in a way that doesn't close them off. It just refines what they allow. They become more careful with their energy. They think twice before giving someone infinite access to their heart. They pay attention to who listens, who stays, who shows up without being asked. They become masters at reading patterns, at understanding when someone's inconsistency isn't an accident but a character trait. And once they recognize that, they don't chase, they don't beg, they don't rationalize, they step back gracefully with dignity because they've felt the cost of staying where they're not valued. It's not that they're afraid to love again. They're just unwilling to repeat the same painful chapters. They know the difference between vulnerability and self-sacrifice. They know when a relationship is growing and when it's draining. They know when someone is speaking with sincerity and when someone is speaking with convenience. And because they know, they won't settle for almost love or almost respect or almost effort. There's a quiet strength in that. A strength you only get after you've healed yourself without applause, without recognition, without anyone handing you a roadmap. They've cried behind closed doors, forgiven people who never apologized, and let go of people they wanted to keep. They've rebuilt their trust slowly, brick by brick, until it became something unshakable, not because it's naive, but because it's earned. They've also learned that healing isn't a straight line. Some days you feel whole, and some days the past taps your shoulder like a ghost you thought you buried. Emotionally intelligent women don't shame themselves for that. They honor it. They know healing isn't the absence of hurt. It's the ability to move through life without letting that hurt rule them. They know when an old wound starts aching again, it's not a setback. It's a sign they've reached a deeper layer, something that's ready to be understood and released. And here's the thing, they don't hide their scars. They don't pretend they were never wounded, but they don't use those scars as walls either. They use them as reminders of how far they've come, reminders of what they will no longer tolerate, reminders of their ability to survive things that once felt unbearable. Their scars aren't warnings, they're wisdom. Because of what they've lived through, they've developed a level of empathy that's both beautiful and rare. They can sit with someone else's pain without needing to fix it, without making it about themselves. They know how to hold space because they know what it feels like when no one holds space for you. They know how to comfort others in ways that feel genuine, not performative, because they've been on the receiving end of hollow reassurance and they refuse to give that to anyone else. The people who cross paths with women like this often don't realize the depth of the journey behind their gentleness. They don't see the nights spent questioning their worth, the mornings spent choosing to stand back up, the internal battles fought in silence. They only see who she has become, a woman who loves wisely, who feels deeply, who listens intentionally, who sets boundaries without apology, a woman who doesn't need to prove anything because she has already proven everything to herself. And maybe that's why isolation becomes a familiar place for her, not a punishment, not a prison, but a sanctuary, a place where she can hear her own voice, trust her own instincts, and remember the lessons life carved into her spirit. A place where no one takes advantage of her kindness, where no one confuses her empathy for weakness, where no one mistakes her love for obligation. She's been hurt before, she learned from it, and now she lives with an awakened heart, still open, still soft, but wise enough to choose where it beats. If you want, I can expand the next keynote in the same style and length. There's a quiet power in being alone, not the kind of loneliness that empties you, but the kind of solitude that fills you, that reshapes you, that lets you see yourself clearly when the world is too loud to hear your own thoughts. Emotionally intelligent women understand this instinctively. They've walked through life absorbing the energy, the noise, the chaos, and they've realized that sometimes the most radical act of self-respect is simply stepping away. Solitude becomes not a punishment, not a retreat, but a tool to sharpen their minds, strengthen their heart, and expand their soul. It starts with noticing what the world asks of them, the constant interaction, the social demands, the expectations. It can feel endless. People often assume that someone emotionally aware thrives on connection alone, but the truth is deeper. Being emotionally intelligent comes with a heightened sensitivity, a constant attunement to others' moods, their pain, their joys, their insecurities. It's exhausting. And so, solitude isn't an absence, it's a reset. It's where she can stop carrying the emotional weight of everyone around her long enough to focus on herself, to recalibrate. In that quiet space, she can finally ask the questions that only she can answer. What do I want? What do I need? Who am I beyond the roles I play and the masks I wear for others? Solitude gives her the room to confront these questions honestly. Without it, reflection is impossible and decisions are made under the influence of other people's voices instead of her own. And that reflection is crucial. It's in these moments alone that she distinguishes between who she is and who she's been told to be. It's where she identifies patterns in her life, habits that no longer serve her, and boundaries that need reinforcement. Solitude also gives her space to cultivate creativity and intuition. When she's alone, her mind is free to wander, to imagine, to explore ideas without judgment. Many emotionally intelligent women are thinkers, dreamers, and visionaries, but the demands of life can drown that inner voice out. When they carve out time alone, they rediscover that voice. They can experiment with ideas, pursue projects, write, paint, create, or simply think without interruption. Even mundane moments, sitting on a porch, walking along a quiet street, watching the rain, become fertile ground for insight and inspiration. The world slows down around them, and in that stillness, the seeds of growth take root. There's also a level of emotional processing that only solitude allows. They've spent time listening to others, absorbing others' feelings, interpreting subtle cues. Solitude lets them process their own. In the quiet, they can feel fully grief, anger, joy, longing, love, without distraction or obligation. They learn to understand their own emotional rhythms, the triggers that disturb them, the spaces that calm them. They come to recognize that their feelings are neither weaknesses nor burdens, but messages, and in solitude they can translate them, integrate them, and emerge stronger. A friend of mine told me once that she took a month-long solo trip just to be with herself. She didn't plan to meet anyone, didn't plan to perform or impress. She went to a remote place with nothing but her thoughts, a notebook, and the silence of nature. By the end of the month, she returned with clarity she hadn't felt in years. She had worked through old wounds, rediscovered passions she'd set aside, and realized how many of her choices had been shaped by fear or expectation. That kind of growth doesn't come from social approval. It comes from the willingness to face yourself without distraction. Solitude is also a teacher of boundaries. Emotionally intelligent women understand that their energy is finite. They know that giving without replenishing leads to depletion. Time alone teaches them how to protect their emotional reserves without guilt. They learn to say no to what drains them, yes to what nourishes them, and to recognize that their presence is precious. They understand that growth is not about doing more for everyone else, but about doing more for themselves in ways that make their contributions to the world more meaningful and sustainable. And there's courage in this choice to step away, to prioritize oneself, to admit that you need space to grow. That is not weakness, it is boldness. The world often equates visibility and busyness with worth, but emotionally intelligent women know better. They understand that stepping back is not stepping out of life, it's stepping into it more fully, with awareness and intentionality. In solitude, they also practice reflection on relationships. They can evaluate connections without the noise of emotion or pressure from others. They can see who uplifts them, who drains them, who challenges them in ways that foster growth, and who keeps them stagnant. They learn to approach relationships not out of need, but out of alignment, recognizing that true connection comes from wholeness, not dependence. Solitude allows them to return to interactions as their full selves, rather than fragments trying to meet the expectations of others. There is a profound patience that grows in solitude. When you spend time alone, you realize that growth doesn't happen in a day, a week, or even a month. It's gradual, unfolding, like the seasons. Emotionally intelligent women come to honor the process itself, to see each quiet moment as part of a larger trajectory. They become less reactive, less impulsive, more deliberate. The world around them may rush, but they understand that meaningful change is nurtured over time. Even their sense of purpose is sharpened in solitude. In those quiet hours, they contemplate their values, their goals, and the impact they want to make. Without distraction, they can align their actions with their vision. They emerge with clarity that allows them to contribute to the world more effectively, not out of obligation or expectation, but from a place of authenticity and intention. Solitude also teaches resilience, being alone with yourself, confronting your own thoughts, wrestling with uncertainty and doubt builds strength. They learn that they can face challenges without needing constant external validation. They discover inner resources they didn't know existed. And that resilience doesn't just benefit them, it becomes a source of stability and inspiration for others. What's remarkable is that solitude doesn't isolate them from life. It deepens their engagement with it. It refines their presence, their empathy, their insight. It makes them more aware, more grounded, more capable of navigating both the joys and the struggles of the human experience. They return from solitude not as withdrawn people, but as people more fully alive, more centered, more prepared to offer love, guidance, and compassion without losing themselves. They've learned that growth is not linear, that strength doesn't come from constant motion, that reflection and stillness are as important as action. Solitude becomes the place where they integrate lessons from the past, plan for the future, and honor the present. It's a space where they can confront uncomfortable truths, celebrate victories both big and small, and cultivate a sense of self that is unshakable because it is built intentionally, thoughtfully, and authentically. And perhaps most importantly, solitude reminds them that they are enough. They don't need to prove themselves to the world. They don't need to earn approval or validation through endless performance. They learn to sit quietly, to breathe, to listen, to think, and to simply be. And in that state of being, they find a kind of freedom, a kind of power, a kind of peace that allows them to live fully and courageously in every interaction, every relationship, every choice. They use solitude as a tool for growth, not because it's easy, but because it's transformative. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's necessary. Not because the world will understand, but because they understand. And in that understanding, they create lives that are resilient, intentional, and profoundly meaningful, proving that the most powerful relationships a person can have are the ones they nurture with themselves. If you want, I can continue and expand the last keynote. They refuse to settle for half-hearted connections in the same style and depth to complete the full 5 keynote speech. There's a quiet decisiveness in emotionally intelligent women that you notice if you pay attention. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's undeniable. They have this understanding deep in their bones that life is too short for half-hearted connections. They've been there. They've felt the emptiness of conversations that go nowhere, of relationships that demand more than they give and offer less in return, of companionship that feels hollow. And because they've felt it, they've made a choice. They will not compromise their heart for convenience. They've learned that not every invitation is worth accepting. Not every friendship is worth maintaining. Not every relationship is worth investing in. That doesn't mean they are cold or indifferent. It means they are discerning. They are wise enough to recognize the difference between someone who adds to their life and someone who drains it. And they are brave enough to walk away when the connection doesn't meet the depth they know they deserve. I remember talking to a woman who ended a long friendship quietly, almost without fanfare. She said, "I realized I was holding space for someone who never really showed up for me. I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. And I finally understood that love isn't just about presence. It's about effort, that consistency, that willingness to be vulnerable and show up fully is what they value. They've experienced enough of the world to know that it's better to wait for real than to settle for fake. Half-hearted connections feel like shadows, shapes of intimacy without substance. They are draining. They demand energy but give none in return. Emotionally intelligent women can feel that imbalance immediately, even before words are exchanged. And once they recognize it, they don't ignore it. They don't apologize for their standards. They choose to step back, to preserve their emotional energy, to wait for relationships that resonate, that challenge them, that reflect the depth of their own capacity to care. There's a profound courage in this choice. It takes strength to say no when the world tells you yes is easier. It takes clarity to step away from someone who is familiar, even comfortable, because you recognize they are not aligned with your truth. They've learned that presence without authenticity, attention without meaning, and love without depth is more damaging than absence. They would rather sit alone than sit with someone who does not meet them fully. They also understand that half-hearted connections diminish not just the soul, but the mind and the spirit. Every interaction leaves an imprint. Every relationship shapes the way you feel about yourself. If the connection is shallow, it leaves echoes of doubt, insecurity, or longing. Emotionally intelligent women refuse to let these half measures define their self-worth. They choose relationships that elevate them, that bring clarity, that foster growth, that are mutual in effort and intention. It's not about perfection. They don't expect it, but they do expect presence. They do expect honesty. They do expect the willingness to engage fully. And when someone cannot give that, they walk away, not angrily, not bitterly, but with a quiet resolve. They make space for the people who are willing to meet them at that level, who can honor the depth they carry, who are ready to reciprocate the care and attention they offer. Because they know that real connections, the kind that sustain and enrich life, are rare and precious. They are not things to be rushed or diluted, and they refuse to settle for anything less. Their standards are not arrogance, they are self-respect. Their selectivity is not selfishness, it is wisdom. They have learned from experience that emotional energy is sacred, and they protect it with a fierce tenderness. To be with someone like this is to experience presence fully. To be around someone who refuses to settle is to be challenged to meet them honestly, to show up without pretense, and to engage with a heart that has been tempered by clarity and resilience. They have chosen themselves first, and in that choice, they have created the capacity to choose others wisely. Half-hearted connections have no place in their world. They do not waste their heart on fleeting gestures or shallow attachments. They seek meaning, depth, and authenticity in every bond, knowing that life's true richness comes not from quantity, but from the quality of the connections we nurture and protect. So why do emotionally intelligent women choose isolation? Because they feel deeply, because they live intentionally, because they refuse to betray themselves for company that doesn't deserve them. Isolation isn't their weakness. It's their strength, their meditation, their reset button, their declaration that their peace has value. And maybe, just maybe, we could all learn something from that.